Something has happened to testosterone in young American men over the last 20 years, and most people have no idea that it's happening. A large-scale population study tracked testosterone levels in U.S. males aged 15 to 39 across multiple survey periods. In 1999 to 2000, the average total testosterone sat at around 605 nanograms per deciliter. By 2015 to 2016, that same average had dropped to 451 nanograms per deciliter. That is a 25% decline in a single generation, and that drop held even after the researchers controlled for age and obesity. That same study found that roughly 20% of adolescent and young adult men already met the criteria for testosterone deficiency. That is not a number you'd expect from a population sitting near its biological peak. In this video, I'm going to go through every variable that actually controls your testosterone and what the science says about each one. Your testosterone isn't a number that your body generates on its own. It is the output of a system called your HPG axis, and understanding it is going to change how you think about everything else in this video. Your hypothalamus is going to release a hormone called GnRH impulses. Those pulses then signal to your pituitary gland to release LH and FSH. LH then travels to specialized cells in your testes called Leydig cells, and those cells then produce testosterone. As your testosterone rises, it'll then feed back into your brain to slow that whole process down. It is a self-regulating system. One part of this that I don't see a lot of people talk about is just how much that pulse pattern matters. Faster GnRH pulses will favor LH output. Slower pulses will shift toward FSH, meaning it's not just more signal that your body needs, it needs the right rhythm of that signal. This is controlled in part by a network of neurons in your brain that are directly sensitive to your sleep, caloric availability, stress hormones, and your body fat. That is the key thing I want you to take away from this section. Your testosterone is not a single variable. It is what comes out at the end of an entire upstream system, and that system responds to how you live. If you ever get blood work done, there's something you need to understand before you look at that number. Over 97% of the testosterone in your blood is bound to proteins. Most of it is tightly bound to a protein called SHBG, which is a sex hormone binding globulin. A smaller protein is loosely bound to albumin. Only the remaining 1 to 3% is your actual free testosterone, meaning it's unbound. That matters because your free testosterone is what can actually enter your cells and do anything. SHBG bound testosterone is essentially locked and unavailable. This creates a situation where your total testosterone can look completely normal on paper, while your free testosterone is actually low. If your SHBG is elevated, which usually comes from things like aggressive calorie diets, thyroid issues, or some medications, it'll bind up to more of your testosterone and lower what's actually bioavailable to your tissue. If you are going to get blood work done, ask for total testosterone, free testosterone, and SHBG. Timing also matters. Testosterone is going to follow a strong morning peak, so always test first thing in the morning. A late afternoon reading can show you 20 to 25% lower than your actual peak. Sleep is the highest impact lever on this entire list, and the evidence here is extremely clean. A 2011 JAMA study took 10 healthy young men with an average age of 24 and restricted their sleep to 5 hours per night for 1 week. Their daytime testosterone dropped by 10 to 15%. For context, that is the kind of decline that you see after aging 10 or more years. The mechanism here is that your testosterone doesn't stay flat overnight. It starts rising after you fall asleep, tracks your sleep architecture, then it peaks near your first REM episode, which is usually around 90 minutes into your sleep. It'll then continue rising through the night and peak in the early morning. So when you cut your sleep short, you're cutting off the later part of that rise. Sleep apnea is going to hit the same system, but with a different route. It fragments your sleep architecture without necessarily reducing your total time in bed. The result, though, is still lower testosterone. Growth hormone is also worth mentioning here because it's going to reinforce that same point. Your GH gets released mainly during your slow wave sleep in the first half of your night. Both hormones are running their production cycles while you're asleep, which is why consistently short nights are a direct hit to your recovery, body composition, and your endocrine output all at once. The practical target for you here is 7 to 9 hours with a consistent schedule, but there's no magic precise number that guarantees optimal testosterone for every person. Your fat tissue contains an enzyme called aromatase. What aromatase does is convert your testosterone into estradiol. The more fat tissue you carry, especially visceral fat, the more aromatase activity you have, then the more of your testosterone gets converted into estrogen. Research looking at obese young men found that estradiol levels were meaningfully elevated compared to baleen controls. There's also a self-reinforcing loop here. Low testosterone makes it harder to maintain lean mass and easier to store fat, especially visceral fat. More visceral fat is then going to increase your aromatase activity and worsen your insulin sensitivity. Worsening insulin sensitivity further suppresses your HPG axis. Each factor makes the other worse. The causal relationship here is now very well established in the research. Randomization studies show that higher BMI causally lowers your testosterone, not just correlates with it. One meta-analysis found that about 10% body weight loss in overweight men raised their total testosterone by roughly 83 nanograms per deciliter. The important nuance I want to point out here, though, is that this applies to guys carrying excess fat. If you're already lean, and cutting your calories further might actually lower your testosterone instead of raising it. Just getting leaner is not a universal testosterone prescription, but it is the right move if excess fat is part of your problem. But if you're already lean, then pushing into an aggressive calorie deficit is probably going to move your testosterone in the wrong direction. Chronic stress is going to suppress your testosterone through a direct biological pathway. The mechanism here is that chronic activation of your stress response is going to raise your cortisol. An elevated cortisol will then interfere with the upstream pulse generator in your brain, which controls your GnRH release. It then reduces your LH output. Less LH means your Leydig cells receive less signal to produce testosterone. Human research has shown that pharma-induced cortisol elevations can flatten or completely abolish the normal daily testosterone pattern. One study with healthy young guys showed that chronic exam stress measurably blunted the cortisol awakening response, which is that sharp cortisol rise that normally happens in the first 30 to 45 minutes after you get up. The important distinction I want to make here is short-term cortisol versus chronic elevation. A short-term stress response sometimes produces a brief testosterone rise as part of the challenge response. It's the sustained background elevation that causes your HPG's access to get suppressed. Cortisol is also promoting visceral fat storage and disrupting your sleep quality, so it's hitting your testosterone from multiple directions at once. This is the section where a lot of people online actually get it wrong, and I'm going to give you the accurate version. Heavy resistance training does produce a real measurable testosterone spike after you work out. It typically peaks within 15 to 60 minutes, especially with high volume compound lifts and short rest periods. That part is true and it's not in question. The part that is in question is whether that spike actually builds muscle. Multiple controlled studies, including research from West, Mitchell, and Morton, all found that the size of the post-workout testosterone spike did not predict who gained the most muscle or strength. The researchers were directly testing whether bigger hormone responses led to bigger adaptations, and they did not. Women have far lower testosterone than men, and older adults have smaller short-term hormone responses than young men. But both groups still build muscle and gain strength from the same training. A 2020 systematic review found that males and females adapted to resistance training with similar effect sizes for hypertrophy. If that short-term spike were actually a measurable growth driver, then that wouldn't be possible. That post-workout hormone spike is real, but it doesn't actually cause muscle growth. What resistance training does do for your testosterone health is more indirect and actually more important. It improves your body composition, helps maintain lean mass during fat loss, and improves your insulin sensitivity. All of those reduce the aromatase pressure and improve the environment that your HPG axis is going to operate in. One more thing about training I want to mention is excessive training without adequate recovery can push your cortisol chronically high and suppress your HPG axis. The marker you want to watch for here is persistent performance declines, disrupted sleep, or low libido. There's two things here that are underreported and actually matter. The first is your dietary fat. A 2021 meta-analysis found that low-fat diets appear to decrease testosterone in men with a meaningful effect size. The mechanism is that cholesterol is the raw material that your body uses to synthesize steroid hormones, which includes testosterone. Very low-fat diets actually change the substrate availability for that synthesis. Cutting your dietary fat too low is a real risk, but pushing it very high isn't going to magically increase your testosterone. Try to keep your fat at around 25 to 35% of your total calories. The second is your caloric intake. In overweight guys, a calorie deficit can actually raise testosterone, but the fat loss removes a suppressive burden. If you're already lean, aggressive calorie deficits are going to lower your testosterone within days by suppressing your pulsate LH directly. When it comes to micronutrients, zinc, vitamin D, and magnesium are the three with actual human evidence. And to be honest about how the evidence actually looks here, all three can meaningfully help if you're deficient. But if you're already sufficient in all three, the evidence for any meaningful testosterone increase from supplements is inconsistent and usually very small. Zinc deficiency does clearly reduce testosterone, and correcting it restores it. Magnesium in the research seems to influence how much testosterone is bound to your SHBG, which affects the bioavailable fraction. Vitamin D has receptors in your Leydig cells, and some studies show a modest increase. But the studies with guys that already have enough vitamin D has little to no effect. These are correction tools. They are not just general boosters. Try to fix your deficiencies through food first. Shellfish and red meat for zinc, sunlight and fatty acid for vitamin D, and nuts and leafy greens for magnesium. Now, before I get to the protocol, I want to point out three things. The first is alcohol. This is a clear testosterone suppressor, and the evidence is for heavy and chronic drinking. Alcohol is going to directly reduce both your LH and testosterone. Occasional light drinking has smaller and less consistent effects, and the data doesn't support that just one drink per week will wreck your hormones. But if you're drinking heavy or you drink regularly, it can measurably suppress your system. Now, to talk about BPA and endocrine disruptors, mechanistically, the evidence is real in animals. But in actual human studies, the evidence for any major testosterone lowering effect at real-world exposure levels is genuinely a lot more ambiguous than a lot of the people online talk about it. Trying to minimize your plastic food contact and thermal paper exposure like receipts is reasonable, but treating it as a primary explanation for declining testosterone is honestly not supported with the current human data. The most underreported suppressor in this entire space is actually opioids. Research shows that testosterone can be suppressed by nearly 50% in male opioid users, with the risk increasing by dose and duration. If you have chronically low testosterone without an obvious explanation, this is actually a relevant question that almost no one online talks about. The first and most important thing with testosterone, and honestly any protocol, is sleeping 7 to 9 hours with a consistent schedule. I can't emphasize this enough. Protect your sleep architecture by not cutting your night short from either end. Second, if you're carrying excess body fat, fat loss is probably the highest ROI testosterone intervention that you can do. If you're already lean, then don't push into an aggressive calorie deficit. The third is to train with progressive compound movements 3 to 4 days a week. The goal here isn't to maximize your post-workout hormone spike, it is to improve your body composition and insulin sensitivity over time. The fourth thing is to manage your chronic stress load. You mainly do this by protecting your sleep and not chronically combining hard training with undereating or short sleep. Fifth, you want to keep your dietary fat at 25 to 35% of your calories. And the final thing is to check for any deficiencies in zinc, vitamin B, or magnesium. Try to correct them through food first, and if you get blood work done later and it shows you have low levels, then use supplements to correct those.